Let the games begin.
In 3, 2.
Welcome to the Portal 2 cast, the only show dedicated to making you a better builder. Today is Tuesday Tips, where I offer you tips and tricks for use in the Puzzle Maker. Today I'm going to show you how to build an oscillating timer. As an example how you can extrapolate this out into broader concepts, I'm going to first show you a 4-way oscillating timer that I created. But today we're just going to start much more simply with a 2-way oscillating timer that you'll see is pretty easy to build. I believe I first encountered these timers in Geniosis's Map Creator Tools, Logical Gates and Timers, and I'll put a link to that in the description for this video. Unfortunately, it's not appearing in my queue. Here's a map that I created and actually never published because, as you can see, it's pretty complex and there's a lot going on, and it turns out that I actually didn't like this. I like it in concept or in theory, but in practice it's just a bit too noisy for my taste. You'll see here that there's these 4 laser fields surrounding the center, and my idea for this map was it's a fairly simple puzzle with lasers, just connecting 4 lasers in sequence. But to add some artificial complexity to it, I figured I'd give the player a timer that he has to work around. So if you notice, the open laser field actually works its way counterclockwise around the room if you're looking at the top of the room down. And you can only enter one side at a time, and I've tried not to make any portal areas inside the center of the square, so this would just add a little bit of complexity for a player to try and time his entry into the middle portion. There's 3 active laser fields at any given time, and the remaining one is off. I can kind of show you how I did this. What's a little bit unclear and is a bit hard to describe is how I made all the connections. You can see I did it with 4 cube droppers, 4 excursion funnels, and 4 wall buttons. What's a little bit weird is that each of the laser fields actually has 2 connections to it, and there was a reason why I did it that way, but I don't actually remember the reason for it. But so that you can begin to build mechanisms like this, I'm going to show you how to do a much simpler version with just a 2-way timer. So the first thing you're going to need are excursion funnels. There are other ways to build timers. My favorite tends to be excursion funnels. No real reason for it other than I like excursion funnels. And there may be a more efficient way to do this in terms of entities. So what we're going to do is actually very simple. We're going to have one dropper auto-drop the first cube, and the other dropper not auto-drop the first cube. And among other things, we're going to tell this button to drop that cube, and we're going to tell this button to drop this cube. And what that should do is when the cubes reach the end, each one of them should spawn the other cube. Let's see if it worked. So as you see, as soon as our second cube got to the end, it despawned the first cube. So what use is this really? Because you can tell we haven't connected it to anything, so it doesn't seem to serve a purpose. You can use these oscillating timers one of 2 ways. One is just as a simple toggle to toggle one thing off and on. So in this example, I've only tied one of the buttons to an output, which in this case is just a door. So our door starts not activated, and the first cube doesn't activate it, but as the second cube gets to the end, it will. And our door opens, and as our timer continues, you will see that the door closes. What's nice about these excursion funnel timers is you can easily change the duration of the timer just by lengthening or shortening the length of your excursion funnel. So let's say that timer was just a bit too fast for me. We're going to shorten that up. One thing I like to do for precision is to make sure that my cube droppers are actually as close to the excursion funnel as possible so that the timing element actually takes place in the funnel. And in addition, if you're designing this in a map, of course a player can interrupt the timer by grabbing one of these cubes out, and maybe that's what you want your puzzle to be. The player has to figure out how to interrupt this mechanism, so that's fine. But what you'll see more often is that people will close off that part of the puzzle so that you can't interfere with it. And when I'm designing, I prefer to put these mechanisms somewhere where I can see them while I'm designing. That way I can constantly reference what's going on and see the logic that's allowing them to affect the rest of the map. Otherwise, you can kind of forget what's going on. It's behind the scenes. You might not remember the exact timing or how many things, especially as you get to more complex versions of this, like my 4-way oscillating timer. Now you may wonder why for only a single linked element I didn't simply create one excursion funnel, one cube dropper, and one wall button. The reason is the timing is too short. if the cube hits the button and then respawns itself, that door actually only opens for a fraction of a second. Where you see here we have a good 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, something like 5 seconds. But what I actually find to be a little bit more fun, rather than connecting to one element, is to connect to two things, or maybe you want to make a barrier of some kind. Here's a version of the timer where I've connected two elements, and you'll see that this has an oscillating effect between the two, and what this creates in this kind of puzzle is a vestibule for the player to enter. But I don't want to limit your imagination as far as what you can do with these timers. You can do all sorts of things with them. You can use them to activate puzzle elements the player might need, like a light bridge or an excursion funnel. I once used it to have an excursion funnel reverse itself, so the player could travel back and forth between two areas of the puzzle, but not by his own choosing. He had to actually time it, so he couldn't use portals between the two, and that affected the complexity of the puzzle a little bit. So be creative in your applications of this, and experiment with trying to link more of these up, and you will see it does get a little bit more complex depending what you want the end result in your puzzle to be. And consider whether you want the player to understand what's going on with the timer. Of course, I'm a fan of transparency, but with this kind of mechanism, of course, you may just want the timer to work and the player to have to figure out as a matter of course. Now, in this particular puzzle, I would actually advise against that, because when the player walks in, he doesn't see anything changing this laser field. If you were to opaque that wall back there and hide the mechanism, and you'd have to wait for the first cube to reach the end of the funnel. The player might assume you didn't know what you were doing designing a puzzle, because there's no way past this if you don't wait for the timer to go. That's not a ridiculous amount of time, but of course if you were doing something longer, that could be very impressive. I'm going to caution you not to use this for insta-death traps where you trick a player into going onto a platform that's only going to drop him into water or otherwise kill him. I'm not a fan of those style things. Instead, rather use this to add to the complexity of your puzzles and give them another twist that you don't normally see. Thanks for watching, and thanks as always for mapping.